Hi, I'm James Ledger and I'm the composer of the piece, The Distortion Mirror. The ASQ commissioned me and I immediately had in the back of my mind the idea of using electronics. I ventured this idea to them and they were more than keen to sort of give it a go. The electronics are a very comprehensive part of the piece. It's almost a quintet. That element is really crucial to it, the success of the piece. Each instrument has got a quite comprehensive bug mics attached to the instrument. So there's 4 feeds that come from the quartet and that goes into the computer. The computer is running a program called Ableton Live and that processes the sound in various different ways. But the one main effect that I use is one called looping, where the sound is immediately recorded and is put into a buffer and that can be immediately spat out again. So it can either be reversed or changed in pitch or changed in time. You know, I didn't want this piece to be, here's an effect, here's a different effect, here's a different effect again. I wanted to just limit myself to 2, 3 or maybe 4 effects all up, so that the piece had a cohesiveness about it rather than each movement or each section being completely unrelated. It's really incredible because sometimes you can have tiny little loops that just last milliseconds and the longest loop in the piece goes for about 3 minutes. When it gets played back, we play it back at half speed so it actually just becomes a part of a background effect while the quartet play on over the top of it. Sometimes it's quite funny how in different performances those effects happen in different spots because nothing is synced up. It's all done freely in free time. So it changes, each performance is slightly different from the previous. You know, there was a lot of experimentation, but a lot of it was me thinking, I want to achieve this certain effect, now I'll try to do that. So things like a delay would be put back into itself, but the next time it came out, it would be an octave higher. And so when it was put into itself, it was an octave higher than that one. So you get this cascading, the rapidly rises up. Yeah, those kind of effects were the ones that were sort of intriguing me the most. I just see electronics as a tool. I don't sort of see it as a thing that I'll become an electronics composer or anything like that. It's just another way of doing what I do. It's called the Distortion Mirror because I was thinking about these mirrors that you see in carnivals, the convex-shaped ones where you look into them and your image is highly, transmuted in some way. You either have a wobbly outline or you're skinny or fat or whatever it is. And I thought about making that into the sound world. What's the equivalent of that? It can't be instantaneous, of course, because music is a time-based art form. So the idea of this looping, you play something and then it's played back immediately, is like a little bit like looking at yourself. The violin might be looking at himself in the mirror and he plays something, then it comes back in a transfigured way. And I saw that analogy between the sound world and, these distorting mirrors. The idea of calling it the distortion mirror was also based on the effects world. I mean, a lot of guitar effects, if you call a distortion effect, the pedals that you have. I also like that connection. Yeah, so I like the idea of opposites, the idea that we need these opposite extremes to make sense of, the world and our lives and so on. Night follows day, we have cold and hot, up and down and all that. So in the first movement called Dusk to Dawn, we start with the instruments are kind of agitated and there's this sort of sinister pulsing in 3 of the instruments where the violin is kind of playing this agitated figure over the top, and that's recorded and spat out in reverse. And so it's all this kind of, I don't know how to describe it, it's just this kind of strange world that, when it's nighttime, our other senses get heightened. And then in the second half of that piece, it becomes calm, like when the sun comes up and it's dawn, we think more rationally. The second movement is called How to Defy Gravity. I was just imagining, again, with opposites, we normally fall down, but I thought, what would it be like to fall upwards? The second movement starts with all these high harmonics, and then it's played back at half the speed, and so everything's down an octave. And you get what was once a very flighty and sort of transcendentally high glissando becomes this kind of like an animal crying or something. It's very mysterious and because it's dropped in pitch and speed. So at the same time, there's this incredible accelerando in this movement that I'd never written before, where the quartet starts at one tempo and quite soft, and over a period of, I think, about 3 minutes, it accelerates. And so it's almost imperceptible. It's like looking at a minute hand on a watch. So it's that kind of, it's an incredibly slow accelerando, and I thought that related to this idea of falling upwards. And the second half of that is, I guess it's a kind of opposite. I feel as though it's music that reflects what it would be like to look down on the earth. So it's quite calm and transcendental, I suppose, and a complete contrast to the freneticism of the first half of that movement. The third movement is called To Fly Then Fall, which is almost in itself the opposite to the second movement. It's very joyous and ecstatic, and it's pizzicato for the entire time, almost. In this movement, the effects provide pitch shifting 1 octave lower. So whilst they're pulsing away very rapidly with the pizzicato underneath, it's an octave lower, but there's also a little bit of lag in it because of the time it takes for the electronics to do their thing. So it sounds kind of like this thing's trying to keep up with itself. And when we get to the second half of that piece, the opposite that I introduced there was of rhythmic complexities, where the first half had been this quite constant pulse. The second half becomes completely awkward and sort of fumbling. And it's a bit like sort of falling back to earth without a parachute, and very chaotic. And the effects there, the operator is sort of riffing with the looping. So what he or she does there is really up to them. So the loops vary each performance. And then at the very final moment, the loop is left hanging in the air, and whatever's been captured in the final seconds is what the loop is. And the fourth movement is called Science and Religion. And these, I guess, are two big contrasts that we've probably all pondered over once or twice in our lives. This piece starts with a lot of extended techniques in the instrument. So there's scraping and tapping, and the idea I had there was, with the massive amounts of repeating delays on each sound, it forms this big, like a cloud, a soundscape. So they all start doing the same sort of gesture, and then one of them morphs off into another one, and then they all follow. The cello leads it, and they all follow the cello. So you get these big soundscapes that kind of morph into one another. And I imagine it a bit like a scientist looking through a microscope at molecules or atoms, and you get that kind of clustery effect. And then for the second half of that movement, the music becomes very like a processional. And so it's very, traditionally notated, and a complete contrast to what has come before. But what is good about it, you still get that blurred, the cloud effect still rolls into this second half of the traditional music. And so you get this kind of nice overlap. Yeah, so each movement is really in two halves, and when I'm sort of exploring two opposites, like, looking at yourself and there's something not right in the reflection kind of thing.